Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Sweet Valley Natural Processed Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Manhattan, based out of Rotterdam, Netherlands. And this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of the Right Roasts June subscription box, where it finished third place out of 4 coffees on that day. And Sweet Valley is a standby of Manhattan, as it's a coffee that they regularly have available for purchase. However, it's a coffee that I have never particularly been interested in purchasing, given that it is a natural processed Colombian, and natural processed Colombians tend to be my least favorite coffee. I like them even less than super savory washed Kenyan coffees. So had it not been featured in the subscription box, there's entirely a chance I never would have actually tried this coffee. So in that sense, it'll make for a review that I otherwise wouldn't have done. So here's to discussing this coffee, as this right here is day 30. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little cooler than normal. For Manhattan's coffees, we typically go 208, but we brewed this one through the Chemex, which would indicate a more medium grind. Manhattan is a European light for the roast profile. That out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 20, first impression, and the coffee bucked a lot of the expectations that we had for a natural processed Colombian coffee, as it came out with a slightly cleaner than anticipated base. The aroma of the beans themselves yield a very wild bag of apple aroma to it, and that was kind of interesting and a little tricky at times, because I fully expected to maybe get a huge abundance of apples from this coffee. It's really interesting just how strong the aroma is of apples from the whole beans themselves, but even then, not necessarily the most dominant factor, as it had a fair bit of that Colombian cherry robustness. However, it was in moderation. So my biggest complaint about natural processed Colombians is that they're overbearing in the grainy cherry aspect. This one right here had it in moderation with a slightly cleaner base, so we were already off to a better than expected first start. Day 21, not much of a difference in the second brew, but I did notice the listed bubblegum aroma in the bloom itself. So this coffee smells really beautiful, and I think the challenge for me was to get out a lot of these really beautiful flavors that were coming from the aroma of the bloom, as well as the aroma of the whole beans themselves, as it kind of shifts to the more accentuated cherry-like aspect in this cup. A lot of these things are slightly present, that listed bubblegum as well as the apple. However, it still does have that kind of grainy cherry quality to it. So still looking to kind of shift this coffee a little bit more in the direction of the aforementioned flavor notes. Day 23, another day through the Chemex, and still not finding the natural to be too much different in this cup, as it's been consistent with the natural berry-like aspects dominating it. Still cleaner than the average natural Colombian, but still not able to get those flavors that I was looking for. Day 25, best day of this coffee to this point, as I lowered the temperatures, ran it through the V60, and could see a noticeable increase in clarity. And now that I'm looking at this note, maybe it's actually better through the V60. Nonetheless, it's remaining quite a bit of the natural Colombian component, like cup of coffee, as it's complemented by an additional berry to it. So there's a little bit of depth, as it has the cherry, but also it's kind of a little bit more of a darker berry to it as well. So depth to this cup of coffee. Day 27, lowered the temperatures, ran it through the Chemex, and arguably the best cup of coffee to this point. Okay, so that's why I settled on the Chemex, because day 27 was the best day, as it remained on the significantly cleaner side of natural processed Colombian coffees. At this point, it reminds me a fair bit of a cherry Danish, and that was kind of interesting because it still very much had those natural Colombian cherry-like components to it, but it had a little bit of that grainy aspect, but it was a little bit more pastry-like because it was quite sweet. So that's why I liked this note of a cherry Danish, even though it's nowhere near what they have listed on here. Day 28, cleanest cup to date, as it continues to improve with each brew. Feels like the listed bubblegum is akin to the base of this cup of coffee, as it's a very sweet berry component, and I could see that being somewhat of a bubblegum, because it makes sense, a sweeter berry kind of in an artificial sense, hinting towards bubblegum aspect. Still a slight bit of the grain, but definitely a more background characteristic to this cup of coffee, so that's quite positive. A lot of positive things to say about this coffee, given what this coffee is. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And I haven't looked at this tasting wheel since I made it, so this will be fun. Let's take a look. One level 5, the finish at a level 5. It's still a natural processed Colombian. You can't skirt around that, so it still has a very lasting finish to it. And it's quite a nice finish, actually, because it's cleaner. So Let's go through the rest. Sweetness level 4, it's still a very sweet cup of coffee. I've never knocked natural processed Colombians for lacking sweetness. It's just the overbearing sense that they have. And even now, when it's still maybe a slightly more toned down version of a natural processed Colombian, it still reaches that level 5 mark, so they are always going to be pretty dominant cups of coffee. Berry fruit, level 4. Yeah, we've been discussing the berry fruit a lot throughout this time. It still reminds me of cherry. I can't say what it is about natural processed Colombians, but they all taste like grainy cherry to me, and this one's no exception. It's just in a cleaner, more moderate sense, so that's a huge positive for me. Acidity, level 3. I think lowering the temperatures probably helped with that, because at the higher temperatures, it was pretty high on the acidity as well. And I think the thing we must discuss the most and the most important part of this tasting wheel is that cleanliness at the level 3 mark. I think this is the first time a natural processed Colombian has reached that level 3 mark. That might be the most impressive mark we've had the entire year, just because of how unclean and murky these natural processed Colombians tend to be. So that's credits to Manhattan for making this one a lot more bearable for me, somebody that's very strongly opposed to natural processed Colombians. So for the most part, I like the way that this tasting wheel looks. I don't think that there's too much else worth discussing in it, as I feel like this coffee is actually a little bit more straightforward than I was expecting going into it. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, I think based off of those very basic traits, the cleanliness and the somewhat lowered sweetness, this is my favorite natural processed Colombian I've ever had by quite a distance. I'm still never going to be a big fan of natural processed Colombian coffees for their more overbearing sense, but we're trending in the right direction. Making them a lot more bearable, toned down even, is a huge step in the right direction for me, as this one right here, I actually had no issue drinking it. There were times I thought this was quite enjoyable too, so credits to Manhattan for making me enjoy my least favorite version of any coffee that there is out there right now. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to: if you are like me and you strongly dislike the overbearing sense of those natural processed Colombians and you want something a little cleaner from them, but still kind of like the flavor that comes from them, if not the overbearing robustness that's kind of the turnoff to them, that's the best way I can lead this coffee, as this one right here still has great sweetness and it still has a very lasting finish to it, while at the same time still maintaining a fair bit of clarity that a lot of other natural processed Colombians seem to be lacking. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try the Sweet Valley, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the Sweet Valley Natural Processed Colombia from Manhattan Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.